This is Duke University.
Welcome to a finance chat with Hillary Fowler. We're going to dig into some really interesting topics and, of course, learn more about her journey in multiple industries, including finance. All right, so hello. My name is Jared Smith. I'm the Associate Director for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging at the Career Center. And, of course, everyone's here to learn about you, so I'll pass it over to my co-host to introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Lena Basha. I'm a sophomore here at Duke studying computer science, and I'm super excited to hear from you today because I am possibly deciding to minor in economics or finance, and so I'd love for you to introduce yourself and go ahead.
Sure. So my name's Hillary Fowler, and I graduated from Duke with a degree in economics in 2003, and I currently work at the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of this conversation will cover a lot of different themes, and we wanted to start this conversation off similar to folks in Lena's shoes, really trying to think about discovery, exploration, what's out there for them. So could you do us a favor and describe your career journey and key decision points that helped you arrive at the place that you are today?
Sure. So my career journey has been fairly unique in terms of all of the different areas that I've been able to work in within the financial services industry. And I couldn't have really anticipated the evolution sitting here as a senior here on campus. So I will say that my career journey has been very unique as it's allowed me to work in so many different areas of the financial services industry. And I couldn't have anticipated its evolution as a senior here on campus. So one preface is that right before I graduated, we had the dot-com bubble burst. And so that actually impacted a lot of the recruiting efforts on campus. There were offers that were rescinded. I knew people who had their offers pushed out. And so it was a pretty tough market to be graduating in 2003, despite having interned in New York the summer before. So a lot of my early opportunities came about through connections I'd made, both with Duke classmates as well as professionally. So I landed at a small firm called Quick & Riley. It was a retail brokerage shop that was bought by Bank of America. And so I got my broker's license, and I started to dial for dollars in order to hopefully get people to let me advise them on their personal financing decisions. And so after about a year and a half or so of that, I decided I wanted to do something that was a bit more intellectually challenging. New York is a very satiated market, and being 21 years old and never having lived there before, I wasn't necessarily the first choice for the moneyed folks there to hand over their money for me to invest. And I also just was more attracted to looking at institutions. So a Duke classmate actually let me know that there was a off-cycle analyst class being hired by Citigroup. Apparently they didn't hire enough analysts in their corporate banking division. So joined that program in January of, I think it was 2005, and did a training program and landed in the financial institutions group covering large banks and financial institutions. And we were responsible for commercial loans and lending to banks, but also because banks don't really make a lot of money, we would cross-sell with other product partners so that we can get higher revenue generating business. And so we worked a lot with our counterparties in debt capital markets, and through that and seeing those analysts in action, I was like, I kind of really like that environment, the trading desk, and being closer to those markets. And ultimately ended up leaving to go to Goldman Sachs and work in their FIG financing group on the DCM desk, or debt capital markets desk. So I landed at Goldman in 2007, saw a bit of a normalized market, and then proceeded to ride through the financial crisis.
Right? Yeah, I'm like around that time. I'm like,
right. But it was an invaluable experience, I think, because we were covering primarily financial institutions. I eventually picked up coverage of the agencies, so Fannie and Freddie Mac. And so I was kind of having a front row seat to the financial crisis and being in the flows of conversations with banks who were in trouble or in the process of potentially failing, and talking to them about how they might shore up their balance sheets in order to weather the crisis. So it was an amazing experience in terms of learning. It was also very intense in terms of the stress and the hours. And so around 2010, I decided to take a step back, moved to Atlanta to be close to my family. And one of my colleagues at I had worked with at Citi said, Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta is hiring, right? I said, okay, sure. I was interested in what was the sausage making that went behind this stress testing exercise that they use to create stability in the financial system. And so that's where I landed. And so my group, we are in charge of evaluating capital and liquidity risk management and stress testing for primarily large financial institutions. And that's what I've been for the last 12 years.
Wow, thank you so much for
Sure.
sharing. That was very detailed, and honestly, that's a journey that a lot of people tackle on after Duke, and it's exciting. But you had mentioned that junior year you had an internship in New York, and even after that it was difficult to get an internship, but I think a lot of students at Duke value having an experience where they're exploring their career and getting hands-on work. I would love to hear a little bit more about your journey throughout Duke and the internship experiences you've had.
Yeah, so I primarily interned the summer of my junior year. It was a program called Sponsors for Educational Opportunity. And so that's, a program that is geared towards providing minorities exposure to Wall Street. And it was an incredible experience because you were placed in your internship at a particular firm, but they had partnerships with all of the major banks on Wall Street. And all of those banks would actually host events throughout the summer with the program. They would bring out the CEO and they would address the class, and you got to meet different professionals at all of these banks and get a sense of what the cultures were. So it was kind of also a Wall Street boot camp for us as well. So they did do a lot of training and mentoring, talking to us about how do you present yourself, how do you dress, how do you network, asking informed questions, always following up with a thank you note, in the old school days, or an email, etc. And so it really kind of formed me into the professional that I am today in a lot of ways, and it was an incredible experience. And they still have programs. They're still around. They've expanded. It's not just Wall Street. They have programs in alternative investments, private equity. So it's still something out there that I think would be a great opportunity.
Thank you for sharing.
So I think that there's something that you hit on that I really appreciate, and this is the idea of, let's say you're talking to your younger self. And what advice would you give her? Because you mentioned that you would have never imagined where you are now, but with everything that you know, are there things that you think would be really important for her to think about or reflect on as she moves into that first big job?
Yeah, I would say agility and tenacity is key in terms of navigating the changing job landscape. And just because a door is closed to you one day doesn't mean that it won't open to you later on, right? So I started at a very small firm and then ended up at Goldman Sachs at some point. I didn't know that was going to be the path for me, but I would say that remaining agile and continuous learning as well is key for you to meet changing demands, especially as technology continues to shift the landscape of the financial services industry. I think it's always important to continue to learn so that you can be ready to take advantage of opportunities.
Yeah, I like that, and I just wanted to name that because for me, I think sometimes folks don't necessarily think about those small things as leading to these big outcomes. So I love the idea of just like channeling the journey is a part of just making those strategic choices that position you to be in the places you want to be too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so we're going to transition into a little bit more about the world of finance. I know that you did major in economics, but how did you really stumble into finance?
Yeah, so I knew that I wanted to learn about finance just from the standpoint of coming from a family that had weathered its own financial challenges through the years. I wanted to learn about money. I wanted to be armed and be able to navigate that better than my family had. And I'd expressed an interest in living in New York and also Wall Street to my mom. And it was interesting because I was studying abroad in Spain and I was thinking, what am I going to do for internships? I'm going to have to really figure that out when I get back on campus. And my mom was like, well, you know, I saw this television program and somebody was talking about this SEO internship. I think you should apply. And that I literally stumbled into my career through her saying, hey, take a look at this. So, yeah, the rest is all she wrote.
Well, that's awesome to hear.
Yeah.
And you could take the next question if you want to.
Yes. Okay. So, as I had previously mentioned, I am kind of battling whether I should minor in economics. I'm a CS major, but I'm also very interested in all of the career fields that you have just mentioned. And so, for me, I would kind of ask from my perspective, but also from other students, what is the value of minoring or majoring in economics to you, and your experience overall in majoring? What did that bring in terms of careers?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the major or your choice of major is not always that important, honestly. I do think that certainly having sort of a baseline course in corporate finance or accounting, you know, some foundational aspects, maybe an intro to econ class, so you can kind of learn supply and demand concepts. But at a baseline in finance, I think that your skills of problem solving, facility with working with numbers, attention to detail, those things are always going to serve you. And I also wouldn't discount, or I would definitely also think about those softer skills. So presentation skills, your ability to communicate, your ability to collaborate with groups, those are going to serve you in any career, and certainly be more important as you get further along in your career. So I think it's important to have some of the technical background, or at least be able to, you know, have those skills and provide that technical support at a junior level, but they become less important as you become more tenured in your career. And at the end of the day, in finance or in any career, frankly, it really comes down to your ability to work with others, to be persuasive and impactful, and to bring sound judgment to any decision making.
Thank you.
And that sort of inspires a question for me, which is, you know, are there common misconceptions or misunderstandings that you see people have about the industries that you work in or have worked in?
I think that is there are misconceptions. Some of the misconceptions, or I guess the stereotypes, are true in terms of finance in general, especially if you look at Wall Street and the composition of most of the people working within Wall Street. But I do think that there are misconceptions about the broad array of skills that can be applicable in the space. I think that technology is quite high in demand. I think that data visualization, computer science is going to definitely serve you. And like I said, I do think that the misconception is maybe people feel that they have to be very technical and quantitative, but to a certain extent, especially in financial services, you're working with people and you are selling yourself as an expert advisor. And so I do think that a lot of times people feel like, well, I'm really great at math and I've got this great algorithm and model, but if you can't explain that to someone, if you can't explain the value of what that is going to do, then you're not going to be very effective. So I think that that's something that oftentimes is overlooked.
Yeah, I totally see that, because I think a lot of the time students at Duke, they want to be super technical, but I really do like this perspective of also being very persuasive and being able to sell yourself as well as your product.
Yeah.
But yeah, so going into the next section, I know Jared was super excited about this section as well. It's called the hidden curriculum, and the first question kind of transitions into 2 examples that you can think of where throughout your career there was kind of an inner strategy, something that isn't explicitly told to people who are going into the industry, but you kind of secretly knew that and had to gain that skill. That is something I would describe as an inner strategy. So I was wondering if there was anything you thought throughout, recruiting or throughout your career journey that you had to kind of learn, but no one really told you.
Right.
Which is tough, I know.
Right. Well, first of all, I think that especially as you're starting out, you should never be afraid to ask people to coffee. I think that informational interviews are so important, even once you have the job, and they just getting people off, the desk or out of your office to talk about their career paths is going to demonstrate initiative, and people love to talk about their careers, right? But it's not just, I want to take some time on your calendar, have some informed questions. You want to demonstrate your interest in the space and what are the things that you enjoy doing as well. Relationships are just so important, and so beyond having an informal mentor, what you really want are your sponsors, right? So ultimately you need to figure out who is going to be that sponsor such that when it's performance review time, they are at the table and they can go to bat and advocate for you. Ultimately, that's the main goal. So, it's important to have mentors, but you also want to have those sponsors. The second thing I would say is don't come to your boss with a problem without having a few suggestions for a solution, right? Or at least a starting point for that. I think, you hear that a lot of times from senior management where it's just like, okay, so now what do we do? And you want to have thought about that before you kind of come drop that on your boss's lap.
Yeah.
Okay?
I just want to let that sit for a second because I think that these are often things people overlook, right? Because they have the technical skills, their resume looks beautiful, it makes sense logically why they're a good fit for a role, but then it's these small strategies that then become the deal breaker or edges them out of an opportunity.
Yes.
And I think that one thing that we have talked a lot about at the Career Center is this idea of maintaining authenticity. So for you, how have you been able to maintain your authenticity while navigating professional spaces?
Yeah. So I think that more so now than in the past, a lot of companies are trying to create spaces where people can bring their entire selves to work, right? For example, at the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, Raphael Bostic is our first African-American president in the system, and he's also openly gay, and he is okay with sharing different parts of his life and talking about his partner, and that's something that's still very new. It's my opinion that it is easier as you get further along in your career to bring a lot of that, more of that self, and I think that you always want to be very measured about the types of information you want to share with your colleagues early on. So how do you maintain authenticity? I think it comes out in the way that you show up in meetings, right? So you are in the room for a reason, and your perspective is unique to you. Nobody else is going to have your experience. And so you want to think about how you can contribute to any sort of decision-making discussion that is going to add richness to that decision that's on the table. And that might be unique to what is being discussed versus others in the room. And then certainly you always have the option of, and you should get involved in a lot of the affinity groups at your company. There's a lot of groups that are formed around, ethnicities and or maybe your orientation, things where you can have spaces to talk about your unique and common concerns and influence the corporate culture within. And some of them are just around acts of service. If you really want to be active in giving back to the community, there's a lot of avenues that institutions have created for people to bring some of those other, or discuss some of those specific considerations.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Okay, so now we're going to go into our quick fire question segment. We love to do this. I'm going to list a few questions and kind of just think on the spot. You can have a few seconds, but, rapid fire is the vibe.
Okay.
So let me know when you're ready.
Shoot.
Okay. First question, yes or no, have you ever questioned your career path?
Yes.
Okay. You can also elaborate if you'd like.
I can elaborate. Obviously going through the financial crisis, there was definitely a lot of negative sentiment towards Wall Street coming out of that because they bailed out the banks and people from Main Street were not happy about that. And so I really did think about my role and my value system, and that was really the impetus for me looking at and transitioning over to the Federal Reserve. I really found that the mission of financial stability spoke to me and my values, and kind of felt like I was on the side of good, so to speak. So, and not to say that Wall Street is wholesale bad, but that was definitely a major point at which I reconsidered.
Thank you for sharing. Okay, back to the next few questions. Okay, next question is one word, fill in the blank. Blank is a skill you use almost every day.
Judgment.
Okay. My colleagues describe me as blank.
They describe me as a strong communicator, a well-rounded professional with expertise in a lot of areas.
Amazing. And then if you could choose a superpower, what would it be?
So I'm a twin mom, and so I would say my superpower is multitasking.
Good answer.
And our last question is your favorite memory on campus that you can explain as well.
Sure. I mean, certainly it would have to be when we won the national championship in 2001. I don't know if I went to sleep that night. It was just, do y'all call it lit nowadays? I sound.
That works.
But I would have to say some of my favorite memories are actually off campus from when I was studying abroad in Spain, because I'd never been out of the country before. It was just transformational, and never will you have an opportunity to live in another place with so little responsibility. And it was, to this day, if I see people that were there with me in Spain, it's almost like we have this kinship. It's like, okay, we were there together. We were almost in a secret fraternity or something. So
I love that. Well, that concludes all of my questions. Jared, if you have anything else you'd like to add?
Honestly, first I just want to say thank you. I think that there's a lot of value in your experiences. And for me, I really appreciated this emphasis on the soft skills. I would honestly rephrase those and call them more so essential skills. Because yes, you have your technical skills. You need to be qualified to do a job.
yes.
But the idea of you being an expert communicator, thinking about relationships and how you really build your community around you, I think is sometimes undervalued in a way that is detrimental to people's success. So I really appreciate you just hitting that note, and it's something I hope people really walk away with too.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I would say I think all of your experiences have really described a lot of the Duke experience, just going through the internship process, even doubting your career, and graduating with an amazing job. We love to hear perspectives, and I really am grateful for you today to speak about your experience.
Thank you.
Thank you.